"Move it, old man. You're blocking the view for people who actually matter." The voice was sharp, laced with the casual cruelty of youth. A sudden hard shove from behind sent Arthur Weatherby, 89 years old and frail as a winter leaf, stumbling forward. His worn cane clattered against the polished granite of the Memorial Plaza, and his equally worn hand shot out, bracing himself against the cold, unyielding stone of the memorial wall itself. His attackers, a group of boisterous teenagers, filming themselves on their phones, erupted in laughter. "Yeah, Grandpa, this place is for remembering heroes, not for ancient relics like you taking up space," one of them jeered. Arthur didn't retaliate. Didn't even turn. His eyes, the pale faded blue of a distant sky, simply stared at the name his fingers had landed upon, etched deep into the stone, a name he knew better than his own. 5 minutes later, a hushed awe. Then a stunned, horrified silence fell over the plaza as someone else, a young curator with wide, disbelieving eyes, noticed that very same name on the wall, then looked from the inscription to the old man who had just been so brutally dismissed. "If you believe every hero deserves to be seen and every sacrifice remembered with honor, type 'lest we forget' in the comments below." Arthur Weatherby's life was a quiet tapestry woven with the threads of routine and remembrance. His small, meticulously tidy apartment on the city's forgotten fringe was a sanctuary of solitude, the silence broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock and the rustle of newspaper pages. He had outlived his wife, his siblings most, of his friends. His days were marked by simple rituals: weak tea and toast for breakfast, a slow, careful walk to the corner store for the morning paper, and long afternoons spent reading, mostly history, mostly about the wars that had carved his youth into something unrecognizable. He was a veteran of the Second World War, a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne, one of the Screaming Eagles who had dropped from the night sky into Normandy, fought through the blood-soaked hedgerows, and endured the frozen hell of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. He rarely spoke of it. The words felt inadequate, hollow, to contain the immensity of what he had witnessed, what he had lost. His medals, including a silver star for an act of bravery he preferred to forget, lay tarnished in a small wooden box at the bottom of a drawer, alongside a handful of faded letters and a photograph of a laughing young woman with eyes full of a future that was never to be. He sought no accolades, no recognition. His annual pilgrimage to the city's War Memorial Plaza, especially during the week leading up to Veterans Day, was a deeply personal, almost sacred ritual. He didn't go for the speeches or the parades, if there were any. He went to stand before the wall of names, a vast expanse of black granite onto which were etched the names of the cities fallen from every conflict. He went to find their names, the boys he jumped with, fought with, bled with, the ones who never came home. He traced their names with a trembling finger, whispering their long-forgotten nicknames, sharing a moment of silent communion across the abyss of years. He wore his best, though threadbare, dark gray overcoat for these visits, a slightly misshapen fedora pulled low, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as the ghosts he came to honor. He was just an old man paying his respects, a fading echo in a world that had largely forgotten the true cost of its current peace. The War Memorial Plaza was unusually crowded this year. A crisp November afternoon, a large, rather boisterous student group, ostensibly on a history field trip, dominated the central area, their youthful energy a jarring contrast to the somber dignity of the granite walls. Teachers tried, with little success, to corral them, to instill a sense of reverence. Arthur navigated the periphery, his cane tapping softly, making his slow, deliberate way toward the section of the wall dedicated to the Ardennes campaign. He found a relatively quiet spot, his back to the noisy crowd, and began his search. His eyes, though clouded with age, still held a keenness when it came to this sacred task. He found them, one by one. Miller J. Rodriguez P. Cohen, S. faces, voices, laughter, fear, all flooding back with an immediacy that stole his breath. He reached out a gloved hand, his fingers tracing the cold, incised letters. He was lost in his reverie, oblivious to the world around him, when the group of teenagers, having broken away from their chaperones, came barreling through, loud, self-absorbed, filming each other with their phones for some inane social media challenge. They were a whirlwind of disruptive energy, their shouts and laughter echoing off the solemn stone. Arthur, small and slow, was directly in their path. He tried to step aside, but he wasn't quick enough. The lead youth, a tall boy with arrogant eyes and a phone held high like a scepter, didn't even see him, or perhaps didn't care. He bumped into Arthur, hard. Not a malicious shove, more a careless, unthinking collision born of pure self-absorption. Arthur stumbled, his frail balance precarious. He managed to stay upright, but the impact jarred him, sending a sharp pain through his hip. "Hey, watch it, old dude," another teen called out, not with apology, but with annoyance, as if Arthur were the obstacle, the inconvenience. The group laughed, a brief, unthinking burst of youthful callousness, then swept past, their focus already on their next video clip, their next manufactured moment of online validation. Arthur leaned heavily on his cane, his heart pounding, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself, the laughter of the teenagers fading as they moved further into the plaza. He was used to being invisible, but this casual, unthinking disrespect, here in this sacred space, felt like a desecration. He took a deep breath, straightened his old coat, and turned back to the wall, determined to finish his quiet tribute, to not let their ignorance tarnish this moment with his lost brothers. It was then that the second, more deliberate encounter occurred. The same group of teenagers, having completed their hilarious video segment by the main fountain, were now looking for new entertainment. They spotted Arthur again, still standing alone by the wall of names, a solitary, vulnerable figure. The ringleader, let's call him Jake, saw an opportunity. He swaggered over, his friends trailing behind him like pilot fish, phones once again recording. "Still here, Grandpa?" Jake sneered, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "Didn't you get the memo? This place is about heroes, not about, well, you." He gestured dismissively at Arthur's worn attire, his age. Arthur turned slowly, his pale blue eyes meeting Jake's challenging gaze. There was no fear in them, only a profound, weary sadness. "I am here to remember heroes, son," Arthur said, his voice quiet but firm. "As should we all." This seemed to amuse Jake. "Remember them? You look like you fought alongside Moses." "What do you know about heroes? You're just some broke old man taking up space." He then did the unforgivable. With a sudden vicious shove, he pushed Arthur hard against the granite wall. "Move it, old man. You're blocking the view for people who actually matter." Arthur cried out, a small, involuntary sound, as his shoulder and hip struck the unyielding stone. His cane clattered to the ground. His fedora was knocked askew. He sagged against the wall, his hand instinctively going to the cold granite to steady himself, his fingers landing directly over a name. The teenagers erupted in laughter. "Yeah, Grandpa, this place is for remembering heroes, not for ancient." "Relics like you taking up space," one of them jeered. Jake, preening for his friend's cameras, spat on the ground near Arthur's feet. "Go back to your nursing home." Unseen by the jeering youths, but witnessed by a horrified few onlookers further away, was a young woman named Dr. Eleanor Vance, a junior curator and historian recently assigned to the memorial. She was on her lunch break, enjoying a rare moment of quiet near a less visited section. She saw the initial collision, then the deliberate, cruel shove. Her blood ran cold. She was small, unassuming herself, and knew she couldn't physically intervene against the group of aggressive teenagers. But her mind, sharp and trained in observation, registered everything: the old man's quiet dignity, the youth's appalling behavior, and then something else, something that made her breath catch in her throat. Arthur, dazed and aching, pushed himself away from the wall, his hand still resting on the cold stone where he'd braced himself. His gaze was fixed on the name his fingers had landed upon. Finch, APFC, 101st ABN Div Bastogne, KIA, 19 Jan 1945. Finch, his best friend, Alan Finch, who had died in his arms in a frozen foxhole during the siege. He'd come every year to find Alan's name, to touch it, to remember. But today the pain was sharper, the memory more vivid, brought into stark relief by the raw, unthinking cruelty he had just endured. He slowly bent down, his joints screaming in protest, to retrieve his fallen cane and hat. He didn't look at the teenagers, who were now losing interest, their brief, ugly thrill satisfied, already turning away in search of new distractions. He simply wanted to leave, to escape this place that had suddenly become a source of fresh pain, rather than somber solace. Dr. Vance, the young curator, however, was now moving quickly, not towards the teenagers, but towards the section of the wall where Arthur had been. Standing. Her heart was pounding. She'd seen where his hand had landed. She knew this wall intimately, every section, almost every notable inscription. She reached the spot, her eyes scanning the names. She found it. Finch. APFC. Then her gaze dropped almost accidentally to the name directly above it. A name rarely given much attention, often overlooked because of the more common surname below it. A name listed under a special, almost hidden addendum titled Sole Survivors, Designated Critical Actions, and there, etched in smaller but no less permanent letters, it read, Weatherby Arthur, SGT, 101st ABN Div Hill, 488 Defense, presumed lost, later repatriated. Dr. Vance gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sergeant Arthur Weatherby. Hill 488. That was a legendary, almost mythical engagement. A tiny, isolated unit holding out against impossible odds for 3 days. Every man presumed killed until weeks later, a handful of wounded survivors, led by their sergeant, had miraculously made their way back through enemy lines. Arthur Weatherby. Was that Sergeant Weatherby, the one whose actions were studied in military academies as a testament to unparalleled courage and leadership under fire? The man whose story was whispered with awe by historians of the European theater, even though his own humility had kept him from ever seeking public acknowledgement. She looked from the name on the wall to the retreating, stooped figure of the old man, now slowly making his way toward the plaza exit. His shoulders slumped, his dignity in tatters. It had to be him. Dr. Vance didn't hesitate. She whirled around, her earlier timidity replaced by a surge of righteous indignation and historical urgency. "Stop!" she cried, her voice surprisingly strong, cutting through the plaza's ambient noise. The group of teenagers who were about to exit the plaza paused, looking back with annoyance. Even Arthur stopped, turning slowly, puzzled. "You!" Dr. Vance pointed directly at Jake, the ringleader. "And your friends? Do you have any idea who you just assaulted?" Jake scoffed. "Just some crazy old coot lady? Mind your own business." "That crazy old coot," Dr. Vance said, her voice trembling with emotion as she strode toward them, toward the wall, toward Arthur, "is Sergeant Arthur Weatherby, and his name—" She reached the wall, her finger landing decisively on the inscription, "is right here. Not among the fallen, thank God, but among the legends." She then read aloud, her voice ringing with a clarity that silenced every other sound in the plaza. "Weatherby Arthur, SGT, 101st ABN Div, sole survivor and leader, Hill 488 Defense, for extraordinary gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." The teenagers stared, their sneers beginning to falter, confusion replacing their arrogance. Other visitors in the plaza, drawn by the commotion, began to gather, listening intently. Arthur himself looked utterly bewildered, a deep flush rising on his weathered cheeks. He hadn't known his name was on the wall like that, in that specific honored section. He'd only ever come to see the names of the fallen. Just then, a distinguished, silver-haired man in a dark suit, who had been observing the initial incident from a distance with growing concern and had then seen Dr. Vance's dramatic pronouncement, stepped forward. He was General Reton Alistair Munro, chairman of the National War Memorial Trust, in the city for a Veterans Week fundraising dinner. He knew the Hill 488 story intimately. It was required reading at West Point. He approached Dr. Vance and Arthur, his keen eyes assessing the situation. Dr. Vance quickly, breathlessly, explained what she had witnessed, pointing to the inscription, then to Arthur. General Munro listened, intently, his expression growing sterner with each word. When Dr. Vance finished, he looked at Arthur Weatherby, not with pity, but with a profound, almost overwhelming respect. He then turned his gaze, cold as a winter wind, upon Jake and his now terrified friends. "Yet you," General Munro said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command, "have just assaulted and publicly humiliated a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. A man whose courage under fire is legendary. A man whose actions on Hill 488 saved the lives of what remained of his platoon and secured a critical strategic position, paving the way for a significant Allied advance. His name is on that wall not because he died, but because he lived, when by all rights he should have perished, and because his leadership in the face of annihilation was an inspiration to all who knew of it." The general took a slow step toward the youths, who instinctively recoiled. "You mock his age, his appearance?" This man, in his youth, faced down machine gun nests, endured artillery barrages, and led his men through unimaginable horror, all while you were not even a distant thought in your parents' minds. The ground you stand on, the freedoms you so casually enjoy, were paid for by the sacrifices of men like Sergeant Weatherby. Jake and his friends were now ashen-faced, trembling. The full weight of their ignorance, their casual cruelty, was crashing down upon them. Other onlookers murmured, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock, then to outrage, directed at the youths, and profound respect for the old man standing so quietly by the wall. Arthur, meanwhile, looked deeply uncomfortable with the sudden attention, with the general's powerful words. He had never sought glory, never wanted this kind of public display. He just wanted to remember his friends. General Munro, sensing Arthur's discomfort, softened his tone slightly. "Sergeant Weatherby," he said, turning back to Arthur, "on behalf of a grateful nation, and certainly on behalf of every true patriot who understands the meaning of sacrifice, please accept our deepest apologies for the deplorable treatment you have endured here today. This place should have been your sanctuary, not a stage for such profound disrespect." He then drew himself up to his full height before the entire gathered crowd, before the shamed teenagers, before the young curator whose quick thinking had brought this moment to pass. General Alistair Munro rendered a slow, formal, deeply respectful salute to Sergeant Arthur Weatherby. The sight of the distinguished general saluting the unassuming old man in the threadbare coat sent a ripple of emotion through the plaza. Many onlookers, veterans among them, spontaneously came to attention, some even returning the salute toward Arthur. The silence was profound, broken only by a few muffled sobs, some from Jake's group, now weeping with shame and regret, some from moved bystanders. After holding the salute for a long moment, General Munro lowered his hand. He then addressed the now cowering teenagers. "You young men," he said, his voice firm but no longer furious, "have been given a harsh but perhaps necessary lesson today. You will apologize to Sergeant Weatherby sincerely, and then you will spend the remainder of this Veterans Week here at this memorial, not as tourists, but as volunteers. You will clean the granite. You will polish the bronze. You will learn the stories behind the names. And perhaps, just perhaps, you will begin to understand the true meaning of service, sacrifice, and respect. He then gestured to a stunned memorial security supervisor who had rushed to the scene. "See to it," the general commanded. The supervisor, looking utterly mortified by what had transpired on his watch, nodded vigorously. "Yes, General, absolutely." The teenagers, under the steely gaze of the supervisor and several now very attentive park rangers, stammered out their apologies to Arthur, their earlier arrogance completely shattered. Arthur, his face etched with a mixture of pain and a strange, quiet peace, simply nodded his acceptance. He didn't want their shame, only their understanding. General Monroe then gently took Arthur's arm. "Sergeant Weatherby," he said, "it would be my profound honor if you would allow me to personally escort you to see your friend Alan Finch's name. And then, perhaps, we could share a cup of coffee, and you could tell me about Hill 488. Some stories, sir, demand to be told, and more importantly, to be heard." What followed was a quiet revolution in the life of Arthur Weatherby, and a profound learning experience for a small corner of the world. Accompanied by General Monroe, Arthur was given a private, deeply respectful tour of the entire memorial. Staff members appeared as if from nowhere, offering insights, unlocking archives, treating him with the reverence usually reserved for visiting heads of state. The story of the Angel of Hill 488, as some old records referred to Sergeant Weatherby, was brought into the light. The teenagers, true to the general's directive, spent the rest of the week diligently cleaning the memorial, their earlier bravado replaced by a quiet, somber industry. They were also required to attend several sessions with Dr. Vance, the young curator, who patiently, passionately explained the history behind the names, the battles, the sacrifices. Jake, in particular, seemed profoundly affected, reportedly spending hours tracing the names on the wall, a look of deep contemplation on his young face. The local news picked up a sanitized version of the story. Distinguished war hero, honored at memorial after minor incident, but those who had been there knew the true depth of the drama, the raw collision of ignorance and honor. Arthur, who had always shunned the spotlight, found himself in his twilight years an accidental ambassador for his generation. He was invited to speak at a local school's Veterans Day assembly. He spoke for 5 minutes, simply about friendship and duty, and received a standing ovation. The city council, prompted by General Monroe's strong suggestions, initiated a new program to better support elderly and homeless veterans. Arthur Weatherby still visited the War Memorial Plaza, but his visits were different now. He was no longer an invisible old man. People, strangers, students, even the occasional city official, would approach him not with pity, but with a quiet, respectful deference. They would thank him for his service, sometimes just offer a silent nod of understanding. The faded patch on his jacket, though still almost hidden, seemed to carry a new weight, a new visibility. He had come to the memorial seeking only to remember, and in doing so, had reminded an entire community that true heroism often walks in. Quiet Shoes, its story, etched not just in stone, but in the resilient heart of those who lived it, and that sometimes a name on a wall, when finally connected to a living soul, can speak louder than any cannon. If you believe that remembering our history means honoring all those who shaped it, especially the quiet heroes, subscribe to Hidden Sparks. Let's ensure their legacies are never just whispers in the stone. The following Veterans Day, a year after the incident, a small, dignified ceremony was held at the War Memorial Plaza. It wasn't a grand official event, but a quiet gathering, organized by Dr. Vance and supported by General Monroe's foundation. The centerpiece was the unveiling of a new, more detailed inscription beneath Arthur Weatherby's name in the sole survivor section, briefly but powerfully recounting the heroism of Hill 488. Arthur was there, of course, wearing the same old tweed coat. But this time he also wore the miniature silver star on his lapel, not for himself, But for Alan and for all the others, the group of teenagers, including Jake, were also there, standing respectfully at the back, no longer arrogant youths, but young adults with a newfound understanding etched on their faces. After the brief dedication, Jake approached Arthur, extending a hesitant hand. "Mr. Weatherby, Sergeant Major, sir," he stammered. We just wanted to say again, we're sorry, and thank you. You taught us a lot." Arthur took the young man's hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "We all have lessons to learn, son," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "The important thing is that we learn them." As the small crowd dispersed, Arthur remained by the wall, his fingers gently tracing Alan Finch's name, then his own. He was no longer just remembering the fallen. He was also finally a recognized part of their enduring story. The whispers of the past had found their voice, and the world, or at least a small part of it, had learned to listen. His presence, once dismissed, now enriched the memorial, a living bridge between sacrifice and remembrance, ensuring that the echoes of valor would continue to resonate for generations too. Come. The quiet sentinel still stood his post, but he was no longer alone. Thanks for watching to the end. Make sure to subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more incredible stories.